Great. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. All right. So my name is Melissa Harrington. I'm a professor of biology down at Delaware State University. And I guess I've been asked to give kind of my perspective of grant advice on how to get funded for junior investigators. Um, so I just wanted to give a little bit of background about me. And so basically, one of the things that has allowed me to get the amount of funding I have is just because I kept trying and I refused to take no for an answer, at least no from reviewers. I refused to take no for an answer, just kept trying and kept making my grants better. So um, I have just on these research grants that I've gotten just from the top sort of since I've been a faculty member, which is about since 1998. So I've gotten funded, my research funded from NSF a couple of times. I've gotten then a PI or co-PI and a couple of major research instrumentation grants from NSF. I've gotten some NIH funding. But so that's the great news. But behind that is all the other times where I didn't get funded. So to get this NIH SC1, and these are grants for minority serving institutions, I actually had to apply for that 5 times. So it's I just kept getting the grants kept getting better. I've got an NIH R15 grant. That's my current funding. I applied for that 3 times before I was able to get it. NSF research grants that I've gotten twice. Funding I've actually applied 3 more times than the times I actually got funded. And I should say that these is 5 times. These are the unsuccessful times. This is in addition to the times that I applied and got funded. It's yeah, just something that even you get better as you go. So my average got better as I went along and got more experience. But also, no matter how good you are in this funding climate, you just have to keep trying. And the more times you submit a proposal, the more time you've been working on it, the better it gets. And there are only a few things that I wasn't able to get funded eventually if I just kept trying. So the other thing I've been relentless about and had some success with are program grants from NIH. So the COBRE grant, right, is the big one that we have that for neuroscience that supports neuroscience at University of Delaware and Delaware State University. But I've also gotten funding from NSF and Packard Foundation for and NIH for funding for student support grants or for infrastructure to build research infrastructure. Those are the good ones. These are easier grants to get than research grants by a lot, I have to tell you. Program grants, people might get intimidated by them, but because they require a lot of pulling together a lot of people and a lot of institutional information. But the competitive pressure on a program grant is so much lower than it is for research grants, especially right now. But, so I have these. But on the other hand, here's are all the times, even though those are easier to get, they're still not easy. Yeah, lots of other grants that I applied for lots of times before we were able to get success with the program grant. So that's one thing I want to say is you just have to be relentless, and eventually you'll be successful. I also want to give just a little bit of background about what my current research is that I've got funding for. So I work with motor neurons. I'm an electrophysiologist and a neuroscientist, but we're not studying the brain. We're studying the spinal cord. It's kind of a sleepy little backwater of neuroscience, but very important for some human diseases. And so we're looking at 2 things: the development of normal motor neuron behavior and how the development goes awry in the disease spinal muscular atrophy. And we use electrophysiology with a mouse model. So there's a motor neuron in a slice. And then we also do multi-electrode recordings where we have a multi-electrode array and record from the ventral horn. These are a bunch of mouse spinal cord slices that a student made. But you guys want to know, you don't want to know about my research. You want to know about how to get your research funded or your program funded. So I was going to share with you some of the things that I've kind of learned the hard way by all this grant writing practice. And one of the perspectives that I came to over time is that grant proposals are not something that you produce as an investigator and then you're done. A grant proposal is an interaction, and it's a way to establish a relationship between you and your reviewers. It's a funny kind of relationship because you, in many cases, I mean, as the PI, you never even know who it was on the other end. but that doesn't mean that establishing the relationship isn't really key. So you establish that relationship through the text of your proposal, because the reviewers, in order for you to get funded, the reviewers have to like your grant proposal, and they have to sell it to their colleagues, that is the other reviewers in the room, because hopefully, I'm sure you've heard already, grant proposals are reviewed by panels, of which only a subset of members of the panel will have read the proposal, and that in an NIH, that can be as few as 3 people, and only 2 of those 3 people will really write a detailed review of the proposal. So they need to be, in order for you to get funded, those 2 people who read your proposal really carefully have to be your advocates. And so your proposal has to create that relationship. So how do you do that? Well, you have to put yourself in the mind of the reviewer, which means a big part of grantsmanship is educating yourself so that you can produce writing that will appeal to reviewers. So you need to know what is the review process and who are the reviewers, which specifically what you need to know is the expertise. That's the most important thing, the level of expertise of the reviewers. Are they experts in that narrow area where your research is focused? Are they biomedical researchers with a general interest, so physiologists, a general physiology panel? NSF proposals tend to be like that. There'll be a panel that is sort of a broad specific area with a variety of expertise in that area. NIH panels tend to be a lot narrower. On the other hand, one of the things that makes a minority grant so difficult, especially at NSF, these minority programs so difficult to get funded through, is that it's not a disciplinary panel. The panels are made up of minority faculty at medical schools and faculty at minority institutions. So they're biomedical researchers, but the panel has no particular expertise in anything because it reviews all the proposals that come in. So you have to write, if your proposal is being reviewed by a panel with very general, with broad grants that are broad across a broad area, you have to write a very different proposal than if you're writing for experts in your area. And so you need to know that right up front. So you also need to know specifically what the criteria are that they're judging your proposal. NIH has done a lot of work to make sure that it's a pretty standard criteria, and the information about what those criteria are out there. But if you're writing to DOD or NSF or some other agency, every agency has a little bit different criteria that they give their reviewers. So announcement can give you a general idea, but where you really need to get the kind of detailed level of information that's going to let you get into the mind of the reviewer is from the program officer, who can tell you specifically the level of disciplinary expertise of the panel. And what the general expectations are. So that's something that you want to, every time you write to a new proposal or new program, a new mechanism that you haven't written before, that you always want to have a conversation with the program officer who can tell you how the proposal is going to be reviewed. The other thing, right, is grantsmanship is crucial. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of this, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit of repeat, but workshops like you're doing now, I love going to grant writing workshops in spite of all the grants I've written. If I can find the time or have the opportunity to go to a grant writing workshop, I like to do it because I always learn something new. I also get somebody else's perspective and pick up a tip. So it's not like that's something I think you get finished with, that you become an expert and you're done and you don't need to learn more, because everything there's always more to learn. I've consulted this manual, 4 Steps to Funding by Morgan Giddings. Some of my colleagues in Cobury have used this and found it really, really valuable. And it's not expensive to buy on the web. And then there are also all kinds of resources out on the web. Another way to help develop grantsmanship is to get examples from your colleagues' successful proposals. So, and most people are happy to share if it's somebody they know, and if the area of research is not so close that there becomes a competitive risk. So the other thing you can do is volunteer to read other people's proposals. That helps them. If you're a colleague, it helps them, but it also helps you because you put yourself in the mind of the reviewer for somebody else. That gives you an idea what it's like, what people are looking for, what things make it easy to understand the proposal, what kinds of things are just annoying if you're trying to quickly understand somebody's rationale and experimental approach in an efficient way without spending a lot of time. And then, of course, to do the real thing, that's kind of the gold standard. You always want to be a grant reviewer. And if you're too junior in your career to be able to convince NSF or NIH to accept you as a reviewer on one of their panels, then there are these local reviewing opportunities around. So INBRI pilots and COBRI pilots, INBRIs and COBRIs always need reviewers for their pilot programs. So I run the review for the neuroscience component of INBRI, and the way I recruit reviewers is I look at the other INBRIs in other states, and I look for INBRI faculty in other states and contact them and say that have related expertise, and contacted them and say, would you be willing to be a reviewer for our pilot programs? But it could work the other way too. You could contact an INBRI or a COBRI and say, when you're ready for pilot grants, if you need reviewers, I'm happy to help out. And the PIs of those grants will absolutely love you, because getting reviewers for these pilot programs is external reviewers for these pilot programs is not that easy to do, but it's really important. Okay, so some other things about that as a reviewer, what really makes me downgrade proposals is if I have a hard time, if I can't visualize what they're going to do and how they're going to do it pretty quickly in the proposal, then it's hard for me to like it. So if it really is hard for me to understand what they're doing, it's hard to like it. So to make things easier for the reviewer, you always want to make sure that you're providing enough method information that it's easy to understand. And so you want to have the right amount of information, a couple different places. Your specific aim section needs to provide enough detail about the method that reviewers can at least start to get a picture in their minds of what you're going to be doing. One of the things that I really find irritating as a reviewer is when I'm reading specific aims and at the end of the specific aim page, I have no idea if the person is working on mice or rats or humans or fruit flies. You would be surprised if that people submit grants that way, where you can get through the entire specific aims and not know what their model is. So, and then if that happens, this is a grant that's not going to get funded. So you need to have enough detail in specific aims to help paint that picture. And then the experimental plan is where it's really important. You need to provide the details in a way that flows and helps the reviewers kind of develop this picture in their mind about how you're going to do it as if they were going to do it. You have to kind of let them understand if they were going to walk into the lab the next day, they'd have some idea of how to do your experiments. If you can make it that clear, then that reviewer, not guaranteed to love your grant, they might still disagree about what you're studying or your approach, but that is a huge hurdle. If they can understand what you're doing so that they can visualize themselves doing it, then it raises the odds that they're gonna be your advocate for getting funded. The other thing that really can hurt with the grant if there's no timeline, and a good timeline, I guess maybe I would do it the other way. A good timeline can really help with a proposal because it shows that you've really thought carefully about what what you're going to be doing and have an idea that's somewhat realistic about how long it's going to take. A timeline also is a great summary that, again, that's something that's easy for reviewers to flip to in the proposal and find if they're trying to refresh their memory about exactly what you're going to do, if they're trying to present the proposal or when they have to present it at the panel to the other reviewers. A really good timeline can be make a quick Cliff Notes way for them to talk about your proposal in a way that is going to make everybody else in the room feel like it's worth funding. Then, so when it doesn't work, like this is when declined proposals, which, you know, it happens more than even when people are successful, most of their stuff doesn't get funded. And when it comes back, then this lets you see what the reviewers are thinking. Their reviews, if they're a good review, if it's detailed, can provide that little window into what went wrong in the relationship. Right? So you can, you know, and you make a note. What did they like about it? Okay, so that's what you want to play up, or that's what you want to keep. Then, if they didn't like it, there were things that they wanted to see but didn't see. So, what did they want to see that wasn't there? Was it more detail? Was it more experimental data? Was it a stronger publication record? Or was it that they didn't really understand what you were proposing? If they didn't think it was important, then they're not going to argue for funding. And then the reviewers, you know, if there's things that are in the review that don't make any sense to you, they really didn't understand this at all. That means that we didn't do a good job as writers. When reviewers don't understand what we were proposing at all, that is our fault, right, as writers, because it means we didn't get into their mind and paint the picture in a way that they could understand it. Key thing that people have to understand, and this is harder than we think it would be, because we know why our stuff's important, right? It's hard to understand how hard a message can be to convey to other people. But you need to make it clear in every part of the proposal why the project's important. And it's the specific gap in knowledge that makes it strong. So it's the more expertise, the more disciplinary expertise on the panel, the more specific you have to be about what that gap is in knowledge that your work is going to fill in. And so you need to incorporate that into every part of the proposal and meet the needs of the funder. That's more for program grants, but it's a little bit true for, I mean, it is also true for research grants. If we don't do a good job about picking the study section or recommending a study section for the grant to go to, or if it doesn't, the Center for Scientific Review doesn't help us out and sends it to the wrong study section, then it might not. Then it's going to be hard for the reviewers to see that it funds, that your proposal is the kind of research that their area is supposed to fund. If the gap in knowledge has to be specific. The more specific you are, the stronger it is. So just increasing our understanding of something vague, no matter how important that is, increase our understanding of Alzheimer's. Great. That sounds wonderful, but not in a grant proposal, because everybody knows that's too big a problem. But you want something specific. So how can you, tell if you're getting into the mind of reviewers? Having other people read. You need more readers, right? The more readers you have, the better your proposal will be. So one of the things to grantsmanship is figuring out how to get your colleagues to take their time to give you good feedback. And you want two kinds of readers, if you can. Of course, it's great to have a collaborator or a mentor who will go over your proposal line by line and think carefully about every line and help you wordsmith it. That is very valuable, and it's a big reason to collaborate. And collaborators are good if they have scientific expertise, but also one thing that's great about having collaborators is you get somebody invested in the grant proposal, who will take the time to read it really, really carefully. And if their expertise is different from yours, they can help, help clarify what the things that you might think are obvious and so don't explain very well. They can be another person who can point out where the things you're writing are not that clear. But finding people who have the time, even if they are a collaborator and are willing to go over your proposal line by line, it can be hard to find even one person to do that, and it can be very hard to find more than one. But there's another kind of reader that can be equally valuable, and that is someone who's willing to just take an hour or maybe even half an hour and say quickly what their reactions are, because the colleagues who are in a discipline that have some related expertise that's related to what you do but not too close, but some ability to understand what you're doing, they are the perfect stand-in for reviewers. And if they only take half an hour to read your proposal, they are exactly like reviewers. And what you want to get from them is not, here's your proposal back with the typos identified and underlined where it's confusing and expand this and compress this. That you don't need that from them. What you need from them are their reactions. Could you tell why it was important? Could you tell what I was doing? You ask them questions. You can quiz them about what they took away from their half hour to an hour that they spent with your proposal, and that'll give you an idea what kinds of things you need to work on, what parts of it are still not as competitive as they need to be. And that's easier to get people to do, is say, okay, here's my proposal. Can you read it for the next 45 minutes and then talk to me for 15 minutes afterward? I'm going to come back in 45 minutes and we can chat about it. That's a lot easier to get people to do than to take it home over the weekend and sit with it for hours and go over it line by line. But it can be just as valuable. Yeah, and so a few other things. So that was the main point I wanted to make. Think about your grant proposal as building a relationship with reviewers, and and you have to know who it is as much as you can about those people, the reviewers, who they are. With NIH, if you know the study section, you can probably even, with a lot of programs, if you're pretty sure about the study section that it's going to, if it doesn't go to an ad hoc or to, what is it called, there's a special kind of session that just comes together for a particular thing. I can't remember the name of it now. But if you have a standing study section it's going to, if you look carefully at the expertise of the reviewers on the panel, you might be able to find, you can make a pretty good guess about who's going to be reviewing it. So that's another thing that I don't really have a slide for, but if you can figure out half a dozen or four to half a dozen people on the panel that potentially could be reviewers, doesn't hurt to cite them in your background section or your literature section, or find somewhere to include the citation. Doesn't hurt to do that. Okay, so building a competitive research program is the other part of it. And you've probably been hearing a lot of this from other people that are participating in this Young Investigator Network. But you'll hear it from me also. I should absolutely collaborate. Because you want to collaborate. Established investigators can help you get grants because you get a little benefit from their reputation, but also because they will read your proposal and identify the weaknesses for you. That's a great reason to collaborate with established investigators. And you also want to, in this competitive funding environment, you want to not, proposals are stronger if you're collaborating with people who can do the things that you're not an expert at. Then there was a time when you could propose that you could learn a technique or bring a new set of techniques to your lab. It's very hard to get reviewers to give you the benefit of the doubt now that something you aren't already doing, that in your lab it's not already working. You're going to be able to start that up. What is a better way to do it is find somebody to collaborate with who already has that procedure, that technique, that method, that already has that working. and has already published with them. The other thing is from my own, I'm not advocating, but I should say from my own experience, it's don't be afraid. I think it's better to change your area if you're in an area that is a dead end. If you're kind of working in a research area that's a dead end for one reason or another, I've gone into 3 different areas. So I started in the cystic fibrosis field, looking at electrophysiology or patch plant electrophysiology there. The kind of environment, the institutional environment I was in, I couldn't do the research, do publishable research. I had only undergraduates to work with, and there was no way I could compete in that field with the labor force I had in the institution I was at. So I switched to a whole animal project, a snail project, looking at whole animal physiology in a snail. That was a great project, but then when I moved from Georgia, where the snails were native, to Delaware, I quickly realized I couldn't maintain my colony in Delaware, so I was going to have to switch again. So you need to, for your career, a fundable career, you need to be thinking about evolving your career to make sure, evolving what goes on in your lab so that you're always in the hottest area where you can be competitive. And if you're in an area, if you're pursuing research where you can't be competitive, then you need to find ways to, with pilot grants, and there's a big penalty in funding that goes with that, but there are also resources. It also makes you, if you're switching your area, it makes you eligible for pilot funding again, even if you have, even if you're not a junior investigator. So that's something you wouldn't want to be afraid. Don't be afraid to do it. That can be the best thing. Sometimes that can be the best thing. The other thing I'd say is, of course, in order to be successful now, we have to invest. You have to invest yourself. I have to invest in myself. And the important thing, I think, in this list is number 2, set aside time for deep thinking. I think this is something our culture right now is working against. There's so many distractions. Everybody goes everywhere with a device. If you don't want to sit and think, if you don't work hard, it's not even if you want to, if you don't work hard at carving out time when you can just sit and think without distractions, it's not going to happen. So that could be walking, that could be taking a walk with the dog, leave the device at home, right? Then you have to, you're free from distractions. So that would be my number 1 advice. I'm sure everybody's already doing this because it's so competitive now, getting up earlier, stay up later, right? We gotta to get over that hump. I think it's hard enough now to get funded that it's not something that's likely to happen if we settle for, kind of living life at an ordinary pace. But deep thinking is an important thing. The other thing would tell in my advice I give to junior colleagues, something that's really helped me is the things that I get from my colleagues. So I try to be as helpful as I can, and I have been rewarded for that by people help me. So don't let the competitiveness of it keep you from reaching out to help your colleagues with every chance you get. But on the other hand, right, so here's the caveat, right? You have to protect your own work. You have to protect your own research program. So you have to put that first. There are times when you're going to have to put that first. Don't feel guilty about it, right? Because junior faculty especially get taken advantage of by senior faculty. But nobody can take advantage of you without your permission. I got that advice from my dad when I was a teenager, and it's some of the best advice I ever got. So you got to say when you need to say no to protect yourself. The other thing about being a junior faculty member, actually being a faculty member anywhere, at any time, there's never enough time to do all the things you're supposed to do. So we all screw things up. There's going to be things that slide. The important thing is to screw up the right things and be intentional about it. Decide what things are important and you need to take time and focus on, especially like service requirements. make the decision about what is worth doing and then do it. And there are things that are just not going to have time to do. Make sure that those things that just don't get done are not important things and are not things that threaten your research. Um, let's see. So, committees and service work for young faculty. I just have 3 words. Now, if you remember, guys, I don't know if you're old enough to remember Nancy Reagan and her Just Say No campaign, but when it comes to committees and service work, that's the most important skill that young investigators can develop, is the ability to say no in a way that doesn't make people angry at them. So key things, so you have to only serve on committees or do service work where what you do makes a difference, where you have an impact. Not just because somebody asked you to do it. So again, this is a hard thing that comes back on the intentional and decide what things you're going to let slide. You have to be careful about what you say no to, but the worst thing is to not say no, because then you get overwhelmed and you wind up getting your time taken up by things that are not going to help you succeed. Okay, and then I guess the last thing I just wanted to say, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Going back kind of to the beginning with all the things I got funded and the drawer of stuff that I tried over and over again, and sometimes I succeeded, but sometimes didn't get funded. If you keep on trying, if you keep on working on it, eventually things get funded, and then it's, you say, oh, this was a great trip. It was all worth it. It was something that really helped my science develop. All the things that I didn't get funded, thinking about them, writing about them, helped develop my science. That's the way I feel. I learn huge amounts from grants that I submit that don't get funded. I don't learn very much from grants that get funded from the process of writing proposals and then they get funded. But because then I don't have to go back and look at the proposal and try and figure out where it was weak. So I hope that some of these things were useful, and then if anybody has questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Or comments. If you want to add your own story, add your own story, that would be wonderful.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you for the talk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a few questions, but I wanted to make sure that other people didn't have questions. I didn't want to cut anybody off. I noticed that, well, maybe I didn't notice this right, but did you apply for an R21?
I haven't. Oh, actually, I have. Yes, that's right. Twice. I did an R21 twice.
So what are your thoughts on applying for an R21 versus an R01?
Now, in general, I kind of discourage people, faculty, from applying for the R21 because there's no. First of all, they're as competitive as R01s. If you look at the funding line, they're as competitive. As few of them of R21s get funded, or it's as hard to get an R21 funded as an R01. And young investigators don't get any benefit. There's no bonus for being a junior investigator. So I think you have to be really careful with R21s because they can take as much work to produce, to write the grant as an R01, and it's not clear that it's definitely not true that you're more likely to get funded with an R21. That's just not the case. I think where you might want to think about an R21 is because you don't quite have the data yet for an R01. This is a good thing. Maybe you don't have the data, don't have the publication. So so it might be a good idea to try, but I think it's really tough to get funded. I'm one from my record, I tend to err on the side of give it a try, because the process of writing it makes it better, makes you a better grant writer for later.
Yeah.
But it depends on what you're sacrificing. If you're sacrificing time to write papers so that you can write an R21, I say, oh no, write the papers and go for the R01.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have preliminary data, but I don't feel it's enough for an R01. So it could be that I could write an R21 and then in the meantime get more data and then turn that into an R01.
Yeah. And I think it's a good way to go. But yeah, but I guess with the caveat that it's very hard, that an R21, I think that's a good reason, a good rationale for doing an R21. I think the not the good rationale is to say, well, I'm not competitive for an R1, so I'll try an R21 and then maybe I'll get funded. Like, no, makes more sense as a way of preparing for an R01, and you might get funded. I mean, people do. Jackie Schwartz did at University of Delaware. They give the money to somebody. it might be you.
Yeah. Was it difficult to get funding in a new area?
Yes, it is. It is definitely difficult, because people don't expect that you have the right expertise to do it, and so their reviewers pay a penalty or make you pay a penalty, but you can overcome that, and that's one thing that I think the thing that got me over switching to be competitive finally was INBRI. I had INBRI support. INBRI is great. That pilot funding is great for that kind of thing we have, where I was switching from one research project. And then before that, when I went from the cystic fibrosis to snails, I also had pilot funding from a statewide grant in a different state down in Georgia. So it's hard, but it can't be necessary, and it's not something that you can't recover from. I think switching. That's I guess what I wanted to say. Switching areas, you can recover from it and come out stronger if the switch is scientifically important, because it's hard because it can't be competitive in the area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Melissa, it's Erin.
Hi, Erin.
I was wondering if you would be willing to share your website with everyone.
Oh yeah. If they're interested, yeah. So I went on last summer, went on Wix.com, and which is I'm like feeling like I could advertise for Wix.com now. It is super easy to make a web page on Wix.com, and so I made a web page called granttutor.org. I think it's grant-tutor.org. That where I put some of these hints came from there, and then there's a lot more there, and I have it divided up into sort of things that have worked for research grants versus program grants versus the specific aims page. I have this one whole section on the specific aims page. So yeah, I would be happy, and I put it together. Wix keeps sending me, periodically they send me advertisements, how to increase the traffic to your webpage, advertisement. And I haven't been advertising it because I don't really want to help my competition. I put it together so that I could share it with my colleagues and people in the area, in a small community that I care about, so that they'd have a place to kind of consult and while they're writing, and things to think about. So yeah, but if it would be helpful, it's a lot of the same. There's some of these same hints and plus some other things too.
Yeah, I definitely think it would be helpful. If you want to send the link, we will send that out to all the folks who attended today, and I definitely think that would help everyone too.
Yeah, I will do that. I'll send it to Erin.
Awesome.
Everybody.
Does anyone else have any questions? I'll take that as a no. So, Melissa, thank you so much for your time today. And everyone, thank you so much for attending. We will be sending out a survey, so if you could just let us know how everything went and if you have any topics or speakers you want to hear from. And when I get that link, I'll be sure to send that as well. But everybody stay safe today and tomorrow.
I'll play in the snow, but be safe.
Thank you, Melissa.
Bye, thanks. Bye-bye.